A letter to the IMF. Dear Madame Christine Lagarde, can we have prosperity for all? With high esteem of your position as Chief of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, may I share with you my opinion on the statements that you issued at the recent World Economic Forum, WEF, which was held in Davos, Switzerland, from the 23rd to the 26th of January 2018, with the attendance of thousands of the world's elite business tycoons, economic and political leaders that discuss the pressing global issues where optimism is competitively vying with pessimism of what would exactly transpire for the good of mankind. You have issued the following statements, which I have quoted as they are in both the Manila Bulletin on Wednesday, the 24th of January 2018, and to other, including online newspapers. Quote, we should feel encouraged, but we should not feel satisfied. First of all, there are still too many people left out from the recovery and acceleration of growth. Unquote. As a Filipino citizen, along with my family and countrymen, in the endless vicious cycles of poverty and economic crisis, I am personally not satisfied also with mere statements of experts. I therefore demand concrete actions from national and global leaders for the good of the people of this planet as fast as possible. With all due respect, I must say that the IMF policies are not any more encouraging and are completely out of date to the needs of man in the 21st century. I therefore presume that you are very aware of the, quote, inequality, unquote, in the world, but you yourself cannot do anything outside of the box to remedy it. With all due respect, it makes me wonder as to what practical measures can be taken to realize the visions of the World Economic Forum, particularly those hundreds of millions of people, including my family, here in the Philippines, who are, quote, left out from the recovery and acceleration of growth, unquote. For the many economic summits and forums held all over the world, irrespective of, quote, success in other fields, such as foreign relations and strong economic ties, and other concerns on terrorism, geopolitical uncertainties, and some other cyber threats, etc., unquote. We see that the IMF is still extremely slow in attaining these accomplishments, with so many statements being both deceitful and hyperbolic, that did not or do not work at all for the good of humanity, other than to be mere jargon of the so-called experts who are regular attendees. Over the years, has the World Economic Forum, WEF, accomplished anything significant to lift the poor out of globalized poverty, such as the elimination of international debts? Take a look at this report from the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, that was released in Tokyo, Japan, on the 24th of July, 2014. It says that more than 2.2 billion people on this planet are, quote, poor or near poor, unquote. Hence, according to the UNDP, nearly 1.5 billion people in 91 developing nations live in, quote, poverty, unquote, while another 800 million are tethering on the edge as being seriously affected or continuously being threatened by financial crisis, natural and man-made disasters, soaring food prices, and violent conflicts. So what is the point of these economic summits or forums if the populations of the world are kept in bondage to poverty, monetary crisis, and other endless tragedies? Literally, these people are usually, annually, and by the centuries, left out of recovery and acceleration of growth. Money must be magnificently available in the 21st century, not only for economic summits and forums, which spend hundreds of millions of dollars, but to the citizens of the world in the form of a dividend or supplementary basic income, as a birthright to have enough purchasing power and thereby partake in the country's wealth. This can be done perfectly by the government, whether regional, continental, or global, without conditions, discrimination, and bureaucratic complexities. Number 1. It is not like any other regional, continental, or global economic summit or forum before in the world, one's only strengthening and enriching the tycoons, elite, wealthy, investors, and foreigners, as well as not actually caring about the impoverished or starving people on the earth. Number 2. Why is it that Asian, European, or any other regional or global economic summits or forums have failed to address the problems of debt finance and not even focus on the needs of dividends to every man, woman, and child on this planet? Where are the numerous academics, field experts, and graduates of leading colleges and universities in the Philippines, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc.? Can they unanimously take action to make this planet a better place to live in accordance with the Creator? I have always viewed a monetary crisis as deadly and far more fearsome than a lake of fire, no matter how arguable it is or not. However, with all due respect to their privacy, I wonder if ever the rank-and-file employees of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, the Bank of South Pacific, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the European Central Bank, etc., are any different than us and are too not suffering the monetary crisis via money shortage / absence or lack of income, occasionally or frequently. If they don't suffer poverty or the monetary crisis, then good for them. But, also, how could it be possible for them to be free or exempted from such a crisis, while the rest of the world are wallowing in the magnitude of the monetary crisis and poverty? Please explain. I therefore respectfully demand the IMF and World Bank officials to explain this to the poor people of this planet and to provide genuinely portable solutions. We, the poor of the world, need real answers, not superficial ones, from the World Economic Forums, which only mislead us into the dungeon of more crisis. The IMF and World Bank are within, quote, neoliberal economics, unquote. Although, even though they continue to claim that progressive changes are necessary, they do not offer the suggestion of debt-free money creation as a method to assist those countries affected by the global financial crisis. Debt management and economic discipline are not enough to address the financial crisis. It may be a correct or wrong assertion, but the IMF is seen as the investment bank of wealthy nations. It has huge reserves of financial resources, the backing of powerful international financiers, and is meticulously managed as if the money is wasted by the poorer nations. Government leaders of the poor nations might have wasted the money via corruption, but not the citizens. The IMF and the World Bank should be reformed, or, at least, modify their lending policies in order to improve conditions so that there will be less, quote, people to be left out by the recovery and acceleration of growth, unquote. The IMF and the World Bank should begin experimenting with lending or allocating funds to individuals in order to efficiently increase the money supply for local sustainable development, rather than traditionally lending or allocating debt/interest-based funds to governments. Such would result in slow progress or development for the countryside, as well as to most indebted nations as a whole. With this context, will the IMF's proposal of providing interest-free loans to individuals going to be, quote, inflationary or a boost for the economy, unquote, to any particular nation on this earth? In short, after almost 5 decades, the loans procured from the IMF and the World Bank by various governments have become inutile and wasteful, as well as have only become a tool for harboring misappropriation. Tragically, such corruption cannot and will not be solved. The IMF and the World Bank should consider the loaning of money to citizens as the best way to help poor nations beset by the current financial crisis. This is the best way to cease people being left out by recovery and acceleration of growth. Therefore, the IMF and the World Bank should start lending interest-free money to individual residents of poor or developing nations. With trillions of US and Surinamese dollars available for their disposal, the IMF and the World Bank can easily and munificently provide 20,000 to 1 million US dollars in interest-free, with or without collateral-based loans to any individual applicant in the world for business, production, and local development initiatives. The terms of this loan should be 5 to 10 years, which allow for the payment of the original capital plus service fees. Here in the Philippines, if the IMF and the World Bank would choose to provide interest-free loans to the 5 million Filipinos in the provincial villages of the countryside for local development, that would tremendously and fiscally be much better to improve the lives of the poor than to lend or allocate money to the government, which does not work for the prosperity of the people. Most nations are already in perpetual bondage to debt due to being unable to pay the fees or interest upon the original loans. The citizens of said nations are suffering the effects of such bondage. As a result, a bailout scheme in the form of loans to the citizens, not to the governments, is needed. Recurring monetary crises are the brutal reality of the poor in the Philippines and across the world, except for those who have avowed a life of poverty. Bankers of all levels and expertise, including the IMF and the World Bank, should recognize this very fact of poverty, which must be implacably eradicated. Some are positive, while others are negative about debt and monetary crisis. Both camps are in dialectic opposition. Both have sound arguments. But in the end, the monetary crisis creates problems for both the rich and poor. As a Filipino citizen who is concerned about my nation and the equality of all people across the globe, there must be a gradual cessation of this auto-destructive economic cycle which incorporates debt and charging interest. Debt cessation and limitation are the only exits, other than nominal proposals of debt reductions and repudiations. The total debt of the world is now, more or less, between 230 to 250 trillion US dollars, while more or less, the worth of currencies circulating the globe is approximately 400 to 500 trillion US dollars. Oftentimes, these currencies are circulated disadvantageously to the poor of the world, literally, quote, left out from recovery and acceleration of growth, unquote. I foresee the reformation of the IMF and the World Bank to give interest-free loans to the people of the Philippines and other poverty-stricken nations for local rural development, as well as to make money and credit available for less restrictive acquisition and utilization of resources. This will lead to the actualization of a vision of a new civilization where it is possible for the people to ethically obtain prosperity. I call this, quote, the globalization of prosperity, unquote, or, quote, the middle way solution, unquote. The new loan policies and facilities of the IMF and the World Bank should not be discriminatory to loan applicants based on race, religion, education, economic class, etc. I assert that if the IMF and the World Bank were to give interest-free loans to individual citizens, the money or credit will not be wasted due to the fact it will be circulated amongst the community. As a result, there will be an increase in the local production and consumption of goods, thus keeping the economy in motion while also eliminating debt. Thank you for your consideration. I genuinely await any out-of-the-box proposals you have that will reduce the amount of people on this planet who are, quote, left out from recovery and acceleration of growth, unquote. Respectfully yours, Ericvencina.